One of the reasons writing is so difficult is that we are faced with dilemmas when we write. In this module, I'll talk about some of those to make it understandable to you why you face some of the challenges you do when you do write. It is often said that necessity is the mother of invention. This is true. However, necessity often takes the form of a dilemma. A dilemma is where no matter what we do, the answer isn't going to be successful for us. There's a downside. What does transcend the dilemma is creativity, and this is the whole history of humankind. Creativity has constantly transcended the dilemma more and more, and provided us with new insights and new understandings. In the next few slides, I'm going to be talking about the way creativity works, and this will help us understand better some of the frustrations that you feel when you write. Let us use a chart to discuss creativity. On the one side, the x-axis, we have time, and on the y-axis, we have frustration. Notice that the dilemma is in the corner, the bottom left corner of the chart, because the dilemma is the beginning point for the creative process. Just as an aside, we have been studying, and when I say we, I mean our culture has been studying creativity and how it works for about 100 years. The map I'm presenting here to you is a map of the creative process as it's generally agreed upon. As you might expect, there are different versions, but fundamentally they all come about the same way. So once we have the dilemma, the first thing we do is immerse ourselves. In other words, we put ourselves in the process of trying to understand as much about the dilemma as possible. Immerse ourselves in the process, in the ideas, in the opinions, in the thoughts of whatever it is that we're finding ourselves in the dilemma about. This process of exploration is the content that gets loaded into our creative mind, and then our creative mind works out some possibilities. Now notice, as we are moving through this map, that frustration increases, because if we are in the creative process, we're basically flying blind, and we don't have easy answers. Once we've immersed ourselves in the material, and we move toward putting our material together in some sort of plan and organization and structure, we often hit abandonment. We've all had this experience where we've worked hard on a project, we've thought about it, we've pulled together a lot of information, and we've tried to understand it, and we sit down to write it or to put together the report, and we find ourselves tongue-tied and blocked. And our immediate response is to abandon the project. We say something like, well, I think I'll go into my boss tomorrow morning and explain that I really can't do it any further. I don't know which way to go with the project. And so I'm going to tell him to find someone else to finish the project. And the next day, what happens? As we step into the shower, or we get into the car, or we start making breakfast in the kitchen, it suddenly hits us upside the head. We get an aha experience. We suddenly know how to do the project, how to put it together, how it should be organized, how it should be structured. This aha experience comes from the process of abandonment. Now, between you and me, I've always felt uncomfortable with the idea of the abandonment, because it doesn't feel right to me that I'm going to be abandoning a project. After thinking about it for quite a while, I realized I'm not abandoning the project, but I'm abandoning my preconceived ideas about the project. Perhaps I had a preconceived idea of how it should be structured, perhaps I had a preconceived idea of how it should be put together, and so on. And it's that I abandoned, so that by leaving behind my preconceived ideas, the aha moment can enter. Once I've had my aha moment, the project practically writes itself. All the pieces fall into place, and I have a clear vision of how the report is to be structured. Now, let me comment a little on what all this means to you and me. First of all, when you experience frustration while writing, understand that you are experiencing frustrations because you are caught in the creative cycle. You are in the creative process, and so you will feel frustration. The important thing is to understand that the frustration is not a reflection of your capability or your understanding or your smartness or your dumbness or whatever, but rather that it is part of the process. And so when you are experiencing the frustration, what you can do is say to yourself, oh, I'm frustrated with this. I know that I'm working properly because I am frustrated. Frustration tells me that I'm being creative here and that I'm seeking a creative solution. Another dilemma that we face as we work is what we call the writer's dilemma. And here the problem is that on the first level, we have to select content. In other words, we have to decide what in all the material that we gathered and looked at and we studied and examined, we want to include. And so what is our main idea? What is the main point that we're going to be trying to make with this piece of writing? And so we have to select from the many possible ideas, we have to select the main idea, which is, what is the primary message I want to send? Once I've decided on my primary message or the main idea and what I want to include, I then move over to the form dimension. In other words, what is the way I want to express this main idea? How do I want to express my ideas in the piece of writing? For example, do I want to use PowerPoint? Do I want to use text? Do I want to use a lot of pictures? And so on. So the question becomes, what is the appropriate way for me to express this idea? And this then begins the second part of the tension that we will feel as a dilemma. I don't know about you, but I have often found myself changing things as I move from one dimension to another. Once I decide on what I want to say, then when I go over to the question of how I say it, what I want to say changes. And so by going around this dilemma back and forth, I'm trying to figure out how to balance these two ideas, what it is that I'm going to be expressing, and then how am I going to be expressing it. And this dilemma haunts me throughout the writing process because I'm continuously asking myself these questions. As so many things in life, there is a positive way and a negative way to resolve a dilemma. In this case, the negative resolutions are as follows. First, we procrastinate, which means we avoid the dilemma in its entirety because we simply don't deal with it. Next, we endlessly write because we're not choosing a main idea. Or we get lost in the middle because we don't have an organization. And then we rewrite and rewrite until we hope a main idea would arrive because our main idea is unclear or our organization is improper or both. And finally, we give up, mistaking our creative anxiety for personal inadequacy feelings. The positive resolution to the writer's dilemma is to allow ourselves to experience the anxiety about writing. We need to allow ourselves to feel the anxiety and to feel the frustration and just experience it. Out of that, we can then begin to decide on our main idea. What's our primary focus? What's the primary message we want to send? What's the primary action we want from our reader? We can then decide on the form or the structure of the piece of writing. And we sit down to write our zero draft. We call it a zero draft because it is not something that the reader will ever see. One of my students said, get it down, not good. That's the point of the zero draft, just to get things down on paper. Well, in this case, on the computer screen. And then, once we have the zero draft, then we begin to improve it, to strengthen it. I close with a quote from Boswell. Writing a book I have found to be like building a house. A man forms a plan and collects materials. The zero draft is forming a plan. And through that process, we begin to have a structure. But prior to the structure, we need to have a clarity of what our purpose is. What is it that we're trying to achieve with this piece of writing?